Hello, everybody. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Don Williams, who has covered Texas Tech football longer than me. A lot of people look at me and think I've been around Ole Miss a long time, but he's been at Texas Tech covering football since 1986. Don, has it all been for the Lubbock Avalanche-Journal?
It all has, with the exception of just those first 2 years, starting in 1986. I was covering the team for the University Daily at the campus paper here, and then I was fortunate to get hired by the Avalanche-Journal right out of college, and our sports editor at the time, Norval Pollard, drew me into the kind of coverage circle pretty quickly. So yeah, pretty in some form or fashion, be a beat writer or columnist or co-beat writer. I've seen Tech football for about 32 years now.
I'll tell you what, you got into the Wayback Machine just a moment ago talking about that Independence Bowl. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, more than one, because in '86 I was at the Independence Bowl in '86 for the school paper when that was Spike Dykes' first game as head coach for Texas Tech, and Billy Brewer coaching Ole Miss. And then in 1998, another Independence Bowl between those two teams. And that one's very memorable to me because that was when Deuce McAllister and Romero Miller were playing for the Rebs, and Tommy Tuberville, I believe, had just left, and it was David Cutcliffe's first game that year coaching Ole Miss. And the funny thing I remember about that one is I think Coach Cutcliffe was he was learning the names of his players, you know, in bowl practices. So the guys had, kind of like in August, the guys had their names taped to the front of their helmets, as I recall. And they still went out and beat Texas Tech pretty soundly because Deuce McAllister and Romero Miller both had a heck of a night. And then, of course, Tech folks got to come down to Oxford, and, well, they played that, you know, home and home series in 02 and 03, and Tech folks got to come to Oxford in 03, so I got to experience the Grove, and it was everything that I had heard about and more. And I think that was kind of a noteworthy moment in Tech's recent football history, because the Red Raiders actually beat teams twice that were quarterbacked by Eli Manning. We're fortunate to win the game here and the game in Oxford. A couple, you know, entertaining, high-scoring games.
Well, I tell you what, that Ole Miss Texas Tech game in Lubbock in 2002 was my first season on the beat with the Rebels. I was covering Mississippi State for our paper before then, and you mentioned that Independence Bowl when they were making the transition. Ole Miss was from Tommy Tuberville to David Cutcliffe. What I remember about that game was that Tech had a running back named Ricky Williams, and we had a photographer who shot that game in Shreveport, and the next day was shooting Mississippi State and Texas in the Cotton Bowl, where Ricky Williams was playing again. And he was overcome by that. He said, "Hey guys, there's a Ricky Williams out here too." I said,
and of course, the Ricky.
We're aware, Julian. We need some pictures of him, so y'all get some good shots there. But
yeah, and of course, I was going to say the Ricky Williams at UT, of course, won the Heisman Trophy, and he was the more prominent of the two. But Ricky Williams at Texas Tech, he was a kind of a lightly recruited running back, small guy, and he turned out to be just a prolific running back for Texas Tech. Was a second-team All-American, and as a sophomore in 1998, when he ran for more than 1,500 yards. And Tech's Ricky actually outrushed UT's Ricky a couple of times in games they played head-to-head.
Well, I know that by the time Ole Miss saw him in that bowl game, he was a very prolific college player, a lot of production. Tell me about this year's Texas Tech team, Don. I'll tell you, you know, I took off some time in the summer. I haven't really looked at this game yet, but I understand there'll be a new starter at quarterback for Tech.
Yeah, and I can't tell you who he's going to be yet. That's the big. I think anytime you have a quarterback depart in Power 5 football, that's any team's biggest question going into the next season, and the storyline that captivates fans the most. And that's the way it's been around here. Last year, he had a quarterback named Nick Shimonek, who was a fifth-year senior, waited his turn, and was the starter, and he threw for nearly 4,000 yards. It was kind of a little bit up and down. He had some really good games and some not so good. And then behind him, there's not much experience. A junior named McLean Carter, who actually started the final game of the season last year and was pretty good to begin with and then tailed off. Then you have a sophomore named Jet Duffy, who is kind of the is a little bit of a fan favorite from the standpoint he was a Class 6A player. He was the high school player of the year in Texas when he was a senior. And then you have a true freshman named Alan Bowman, who was here for spring practice, enrolled in January. And, at this point in time, it would not surprise me to see any of those three guys trot out there on September 1st against the Rebs, because I don't know that there's been a whole lot of separation. And it's a little bit hard to tell. I don't know how they do things down there at Ole Miss, but Cliff Kingsbury, like most Power 5 head coaches, keeps practices pretty closed. We get to see about 30 minutes. Some days that's 30 minutes of stretching and preliminary stuff that you can't really tell much from. Other days it actually is late parts of practice where you do get to see some team periods. So drawing conclusions is difficult at this point. And from what's coming from within the team, nobody's really said, Cliff Kingsbury included, nobody's really said that a quarterback has jumped out there and separated himself.
Well, it sounds like access at Texas Tech is a lot like access at Ole Miss, which is not very good. It's changed so much through the years. There's a theory floating around Ole Miss, Don, that Kingsbury will look at the Rebels' struggles to stop the run last year, and that he won't put too much on that quarterback, whoever it is, but will try to beat Ole Miss running the ball. What do you think of that?
I think it's conceivable. And another reason why is because Tech's biggest question mark outside of quarterback might very well be receiver, which is a very unusual circumstance for Texas Tech, because Tech over the last 18 years has been known for throwing the football, and has been also known for struggling a lot on defense. And this year it's the reverse. They have backed literally nearly the entire two deep on defense from a unit that made a lot of progress last year. Flip side of the coin is they're trying to find a new starter at quarterback, and they also lost nearly everybody who was somebody at receiver. They had an early entry to the NFL draft, Kiki Qt, who was a fourth-round pick by the Texans, had huge numbers last year. Sixth-round pick, a kid named Dylan Cantrell, went to the Chargers. He is a very productive receiver. And Cameron Batson, a slot receiver with the Tennessee Titans right now. Yeah, I saw a clip of his that folks posted on YouTube last night, or not YouTube, but on Twitter last night, where he made a nice play with a screen pass. But so long story short is quarterback is a big question mark. Receiver is a big question mark. What they do have though is the entire starting offensive line back, and two running backs, both of whom have kind of had their time in the sun. Last year, a young man, a junior college transfer from Hutchinson, Kansas, named Trey King, who came here not really with high expectations because he'd been injured the year before, and he actually came here originally as a walk-on. And by mid-season, he kind of took the job and ran with it. And there was a stretch between game 6 through 10, 5-game stretch where he had 400 yards rushing. And it's not assured that he will have the job this year, because they had a freshman 2 years ago named DeLeon Ward, who the second half of the season in 2016, the last 5 games of the year, there are 4 games that he had 20-plus carries and 80-plus yards. And then they had issues with him after that season with academics and with maturity, and Cliff Kingsbury said, you're going to sit out in 2017. You're going to redshirt. And so now one of the interesting kind of position battles is DeLeon Ward, who had 400-plus yards as a true freshman in 2016, and Trey King, who had 500-plus yards his first year with the program in 2017. They give Tech a couple of viable options, a couple of guys that I think you feel pretty good about. And again, when you're running behind an offensive line that returns all 5 starters, it would not. I think you're probably on to something there. It would surprise me to see Cliff Kingsbury come out and show a heavy dose of the run game to the Rebels.
Tell me about Tech's defense, Don. Obviously deep and experienced. How do they fare against the pass last year? What do you think? How do you think they'll match up against an offense with pretty deep and talented group of receivers?
Yeah, with AJ Brown, and those guys, that's a good battle. Again, it's interesting because Tech finished number 122 in the nation in pass defense last year, so that ain't good. The flip side, though, is they have about 8 guys back in the secondary that have played a good bit of football, and 2 of those guys are actually preseason All Big 12. Imagine that, preseason All Big 12. Two players preseason All Big 12 from a secondary that ranked number 122 in the nation in pass defense last year. But one of them is a safety named Jashawn Johnson, who started 37 games. The other is a terrific walk-on story, a young man named Justice Parker, who he went to a Division III school, Texas Lutheran, non-scholarship, decided, hey, I can do better. And so he transfers to Texas Tech as a walk-on, no scholarship. Nobody knows anything about him. I mean, he's total just name on the roster, and just out of nowhere, makes some plays the last week of spring practice in 2017, and the season rolls around, and he has, 4 interceptions, 4 caused fumbles. He was just a ball hawk and a half. I think he was he had a hand in more takeaways, I think, than any defensive back in the Big 12. So you have him, you have experience back at the corner, a senior named Octavius Morgan, a junior named Desmond Smith, a sophomore who might be the most physically talented kid of anybody in the secondary named DeMarcus Fields, kind of a 6'1", 200-pound kid playing cornerback. And so even though the numbers weren't really good last year, and take into account you're in the Big 12, you're going to give up a lot of passing yards just because that's what they throw the ball so much in this conference. But so even though the numbers were not really good last year, I think the expectation is that the secondary should be able to hold its own this year, because there is ability, and there is depth, there's experience. So you would think that these guys should not be committing many coverage busts. With that said, though, as you alluded to, I think from a Tech standpoint, you look at some of the Ole Miss personnel. One thing that jumps out at you is having I looked at last week, and I forget now, but Ole Miss has what, a couple 2 players like on Mel Kiper Jr.'s top 25 big board for next year.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the term that stands out for me, and of course this is a coach promoting his team, but when the head coach, Matt Luke, stands up at SEC Media Days and says we have 3 NFL receivers, I don't think that's a stretch. Now, not 3 first-round picks, which A.J. Brown could be the first one off the board next spring, but I think 3 guys who really could if things break right, could have NFL careers with DK Metcalf and DeMarcus Lodge joining him. One more question, Don, before we let you go. I thank you for being with us. Tell me about the Mike Leach era of Texas Tech football. Now, watching Leach from a distance at Tech and also at Washington State, it seems like he could be equal parts entertaining yet very frustrating to cover. What was your experience?
I enjoyed covering his teams, and it's funny, we were talking about accessibility to a program earlier, and the first 5 years of Mike's tenure, he had probably as open a program as you'll see in major college football. Practices were largely open, and he was very, very accessible to the media. Local beat writers within the state, everybody had Mike Leach's cell phone number, and Mike would, if I called Mike Leach, he would answer the phone. If he did not answer the phone, I knew he was directly involved in something where he couldn't get to it, and he would call me back. Now, some nights he might call you back at 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. or what have you, but he was very accessible. And like I say, for about the first 5 years, his practices were open, and then there was one of the things that kind of changed that, I forget, it was 04, 05. A couple of guys kind of popped off, and said some things that he thought they shouldn't have that became bulletin board material, and Red Raiders got their tails kicked that week. And after that, he kind of shut things down, became less his team. He made his team less accessible. Although Mike's a guy who I think likes attention, and like I say, he was always very out there and available to the media. So he was entertaining for us. He made good copy, and of course, from a Texas Tech fan standpoint, he was beloved around here, which was a remarkable transformation because you have to remember he followed Spike Dykes, Spike had 2 Doak Walker Award winners. Had great running games, had outstanding defenses, and ran kind of a pro style offense with a little bit of passing, but they were primarily a run based team. And so when Mike Leach came here and started doing what Mike Leach does, throwing it around, especially at a time when teams that was still not the norm. There was a lot of resistance, and those first years when you're taking a run-based offensive personnel and trying to put them into a spread passing attack, it was pretty ugly. And so there were rumors in 2000 about this is going to be it for Mike Leach. He's going to be 1 year here, that 1 year, and that guy's gone. And still was not that it was better, but not great in 2001. And then by 2002, everybody had been in the system long enough that it became that became old hat, and that team took off, and they beat the Longhorns and won beat Clemson in the Tangerine Bowl 55-15, won 9 games, and from then on, it was a great period for Texas Tech football. And Mike Leach is polarizing but a beloved character among Texas Tech fans. He just came back to Lubbock, in fact, a couple of weeks ago to do a book signing. And so, it was a very entertaining period for sure.
Was Tommy Tuberville a good fit there? Did he try to do things differently, or in hiring Cliff Kingsbury, were they trying to go back to Mike Leach's roots there?
Tommy Tuberville had the misfortune of following Mike Leach after, at a time when, like I say, 2008 was one of the great years in Tech football history. And of course, that team got spanked by the Rebels in the Cotton Bowl. But up to that point, Tech was 11-1, had Golf Award winner with Michael Crabtree, Graham Harrell, one of the great passers the program has ever had. It was a period of a lot of success, and then the controversial firing of Mike Leach. So Tommy Tuberville was in a situation where I think just about any coach that walked in at that point, if he did not continue and win 9, 10, 11 games, it was going to be uncomfortable, and it was. And people here never really embraced him. And part of the reason why was because the same people who hated Mike Leach's offense in 2000 loved Mike Leach's offense in 2010, and when it did not look exactly the same, there's a lot. Then there was a very anti-Tuberville crowd. He tried to not. He tried to kind of keep the system Mike Leach had. He hired Neil Brown, who's now at Troy. So Neil kind of did what he did. It was kind of a mix of what Neil likes to do and what Tommy Tuberville likes to do. And of course, Tommy Tuberville's coming from a situation where he had Ronnie Brown and Cadillac Williams and those great running backs at Auburn. So I think the spread passing game was a little bit uncomfortable for him, but at the same time, he knew that he couldn't go directly back to that. So the mix of his stuff and Neil's stuff didn't really click all that well. And so, after 3 years, there was a lot of dissatisfaction, had a losing season, and I think he got out before it got any uglier. And, the thing then was Cliff Kingsbury was a hot commodity because he had just had coached Johnny Manziel to a Heisman Trophy. And, was the Texas Tech, former great passing quarterback at Texas Tech. I guess a little bit like the situation that you have at Ole Miss now with Matt Luke being a guy who had worn the uniform. And so Cliff was the guy who then united the fan base. A lot of people, a lot of resentment over people who wanted Mike Leach and thought his firing was unjustified. And so it was a honeymoon period, for a year or two with Cliff. And then, like any other coach in college football, if you don't win games, then people get dissatisfied with you in a hurry. And so for the last, 2 years now for sure, he's been on the hot seat. We've kind of been on job watch with Cliff Kingsbury. I think a lot of folks, year before last, 2016, next to the last game of the season, they go up to Iowa State and get just destroyed, 66 to 10. I'm forgetting the score now. I should remember, 66 to 10 or whatever. And people are thinking that's going to be it. Cliff's going to be fired, and they kind of pulls a rabbit out of the hat, and they play one of their best games of the year against a Baylor team that was in a skid, win 54 to 35. So Cliff keeps his job. Similar circumstances last year. They go into the final game of the regular season with a 5-6 record and beat Texas in Austin, in dramatic comeback fashion. They go 6-6, and Kirby Colcutt announces, immediately after the game, that Cliff is going to stay on through, not just through the bowl game, but Cliff is going to be the head coach in 2018. And so it seems like Cliff has been on the nationally the list of coaches hot seat watch. He's been in those rankings, it seemed like, for the last couple of years now, and remains so.
Don, thank you so much for your time, man. I look forward to seeing you in Houston.
Same here. I appreciate the invitation, Parrish. Enjoyed the chat.